Hi guys, today I would like to show you what my tech stack looks like, and I think it makes sense to start with what I actually build. So I build backend apps, and these backend apps have a layered architecture, which consists of a presentation layer, which is basically an API. It also has a services layer and a persistence layer. And what I also build are frontend apps, which are either mobile apps or web apps. What does my tech stack actually look like for this kind of apps? So this is what it looks like, and I'm going to start here. So for the backend, I use Golang. Golang is a great backend language. It's statically typed. It has errors as values. It's a compiled language. And because of that, it's pretty fast. So it has the speed of C++, almost, I think. And then it also has the simplicity of JavaScript and Python because of the garbage collector. So which kind of allows you to, or which provides a way to manage memory. So, I mean, you don't really have to manage memory. You can manage memory, but you don't really have to because of this garbage collector. And this kind of gives you the simplicity of JavaScript and Python. And as I mentioned, my Go apps have layered architecture. So here I have a presentation layer. For the presentation layer, I use Huma. Huma is a framework which kind of allows you. So its main feature, I think, is that it generates the API documentation in OpenAPI format. So here's what it looks like. This is actually a YAML file, so you can download the whole API documentation as a YAML file. And you also have this interface. It kind of generates this interface or this API documentation based on your controllers. And then I have a services layer in my apps. These services are connected to the persistence layer. For the persistence layer, I use End. End is this framework which kind of gives you a very convenient way to communicate with your database. And for the database, I always use Postgres in a Docker container with a persistent volume, of course, because otherwise all the data would get lost when I restart the database, for example. And so where do I actually host these Go apps? So I host Go apps in Kubernetes, or in Key3s to be more precise. Key3s is actually just a lightweight Kubernetes distribution. And I think I had a tool, I don't remember the name, but I had a tool to install it really with one command on a VM, and I always tend to use this tool. It's a really simple installation. So I use Key3s for hosting, and as you can see here, I actually host the Postgres database outside of this Key3s cluster because I think there's always kind of debate where you should actually, or whether or not you should actually host a Postgres database in a Kubernetes cluster. And so I think the conclusion of this debate is that you can do that, but it has different tricks to it that you should apply to do it properly. And I just want to do it in a simple way, so I just host the Postgres database outside of this Key3s cluster, but still on the same VM where my backend apps are hosted, so the connection is very fast. It doesn't have to use the public network for the database connection. Yeah, I use Debian as my Linux distribution. It's very simple with batteries included, as opposed to Alpine, for example, where, I mean, I tried Alpine as well, but there I ended up having to install different things or having to find different things that I didn't necessarily understand, to be honest. So, and it's a very simple distribution. And I actually use Linode to rent VMs because I think it's relatively cheap and it has lots of different options, also very, very small ones. And I also use some components from the Google Cloud platform. Here I use actually only two components. I use this GCP Artifact Registry to store my Docker images, because you have to store your Docker images somewhere. And as you can see here, I build these images on GitHub using GitHub Actions, and here's where the code is stored. Here's where I run my CI/CD pipelines, and it's very, very cheap. I never ever have I paid for this, and I push code and deploy code quite a lot, as you can see in my profile. And as you can see, from GitHub, I push Docker images to Google Cloud Platform, and from Google Cloud Platform, my Kubernetes cluster pulls these images. And another component I use on Google Cloud is this GCP Storage. Here I store files. It's also pay-as-you-go pricing model. When you have not so many files, it's very, very cheap actually. So here are the components. And inside of this Kubernetes cluster, I have another important component, which is ingress. Ingress is the component that kind of redirects traffic or distributes incoming traffic across your Docker containers. You can use different implementations for this ingress. For example, there's traffic, there's Nginx. I always use Nginx. I've also tried traffic, and it's just, I just find it more complicated than Nginx. Nginx is much simpler than traffic in my experience. And then I also use Cert Manager. Cert Manager allows you to generate these SSL certificates, which look like these. I mean, you don't really generate them, you actually get these certificates from Let's Encrypt, for example. And yeah, the Cert Manager component just manages the SSL certificates. And then my front end looks like this. So it's either a mobile app, as I mentioned, for which I use Expo with React, and I use this Hey API package to generate the API client based on the OpenAPI documentation. Or when I build a web app, I either use Vite with React, or I use Next.js with React, or I use Nuxt with Vue. And I also use this Hey API package because whenever you have JavaScript code, you can use this Hey API package to generate an API client based on this OpenAPI specification. So yeah, that was my tech stack. Thanks for watching.